Today on the Family Answer Man, we're answering your questions about conflicts within the family concerning the transgender movement from a biblical worldview on the Family Answer Man program. This is David Orgis, and I am here with Dr. Mark Crosby, the Family Answer Man himself. Our time on the Family Answer Man program is designed to answer questions commonly asked in both the counseling and church settings, and our goal is to answer general questions from a biblical worldview through the lens of our collective years of experience and education to help you, our listeners, have a stronger, healthier, happier family. Now, today we want to thank the incredible people at Winter's Air and Days Smokehouse and Specialty Meats for underwriting today's show. Winter's Air is located in Denham Springs and services the Denham Springs and surrounding areas. The Days Smokehouse and Specialty Meats is located at 35770 LA Highway 16, just north of Denham Springs. Now, this show, The Family Answer Man, is not a therapy session, and it's not specific advice to your situations. Mental health is a very serious issue, and family dynamics can be and often are very complicated. So, for in-depth answers to your questions, we definitely encourage you to seek professional counsel specific to your unique circumstances. But we do hope that this episode of The Family Answer Man will encourage you and inspire you to make changes that will lead to a stronger, healthier, and happier family. Well, Dr. Mark, our topic for today is one that has blown up in the news recently, and has become a cultural phenomenon, if you will, in the United States. And so when things like this happen and there's a lot of interest in a topic, how often do you find that people are well-informed versus they just kind of go with what they hear and make decisions that maybe aren't as well-informed as you would hope?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is we all listen to someone. And so there's going to be those individuals who do a lot of research and do their homework, if you will, about their beliefs and why they believe what they believe. Others, however, will just listen to various talking points. They will quote certain cliches they hear about a certain topic, things that have a lot of conjecture and no real substance, and then or their own personal ideas or beliefs that are just personal to them. In other words, just their opinion. I think we as a people, especially in the last 10 to 15 to 20 years or so, have tried to be a culture of people that wants to try to, as much as we can, play nice. In other words, when something new comes along, when something new is being said or done, most people want to be as open and as quote unquote as tolerant as they possibly can. Many want to play nice. Very few of us anymore want to be the bully or the bigot.
Right. That's the play nice. It's be tolerant, be inclusive.
Right. And so that's kind of the nature that we've kind of embraced in the last, say, 10 to 20 years. And we saw that with the pandemic. When the pandemic came along, no one knew what to do. No one knew what to say. No one knew what this was about. And so everybody played nice until it's revealed later on that maybe what we were hearing or seeing or experiencing wasn't as legitimate or as scientifically proven as everybody thought. The point is, so it is, I believe, with many movements today, that people want to play nice until they begin to realize that maybe what they're hearing, what people are trying to say or share, may not be supported by the science or the evidence or the scripture. And so because of that, once they realize that they are maybe being, duped, or maybe they're being somehow confused themselves because they haven't done their own homework, and they realize, oh my goodness, I've embraced something that may not be legitimate, then we begin to rethink some things and restructure some things. And that happens a lot in various movements. Again, I think the pandemic was a perfect example, but also it's culturally and sociologically experienced as well.
Yeah, and that causes a lot of internal confusion when you feel like you now understand something, you've embraced something that wasn't accurate, that maybe you're misguided, like you said. That can create a lot of internal turmoil as well.
Right.
So, and that brings up our first question of the day for the Family Answer Man, and it is a mother that's writing in. Clearly has maybe an adult daughter or an older daughter. But the question that's written in for the Family Answer Man is this: it says, "Our daughter has called her father and me bigots and phobics because we do not support the transgender belief that men can become women or vice versa. So are we wrong on this?"
So the question, are we wrong, is a very important question, a very powerful question. Let's kind of unpack that a little bit and kind of look at this movement, because right now, with everything going with Dylan Mulvaney and what's happening with some of the people that are sponsoring him or using him as the face of their particular product, there's a lot being said today, and there's a lot of concern. And interestingly enough, no matter what your philosophical position may be, conservative or liberal or progressive, whatever word you want to give, there is a lot of people that are concerned about what's going on in this particular situation. So here are some very interesting stats that we need to be mindful of. Number one, and these stats are from the transgender movement for those of you who are just kind of tuning in. But the stats on the transgender movement is this: 1.4 million people in the U.S. claim to be transgender. 1.4 million people in the U.S. are claiming now to be transgender. What's even more interesting is this: the greatest percentage of that population are between the ages of 13 and 19.
Wow.
The greatest percentage of that population, of the 1.4 million who claim to be transgender, are between 13 and 19. Now, that's very interesting to note, because these are the years that we commonly call the adolescent years.
Mm-hmm.
Erik Erikson, years ago, and his theory on the psychosocial development stages are still being taught in universities today.
Right.
But Erik Erikson developed what's called the stages of social development, or psychosocial development. He declared that the stage of adolescent, ages between 12 to 18, that is the stage where he declared was identity versus confusion. So in other words, when you're an adolescent, you're trying to figure out a lot, okay? You're trying to figure out who you are, who you want to be, what you find interesting. You try to maybe differentiate from your parents as far as what you're interested in, what you find fun and fascinating, et cetera. So it's during this stage that we seek to define who we are. Now, for many in this stage, and most of you who remember your adolescence, remember that for many of you, you lived during these years as being very scared, insecure, confused. Where do you fit in? Who are your friends? Who are, who has your back? Who's interested in what you're doing? What do you like to do? So in other words, most adolescents in this age range are trying to discover much about themselves. They're trying to discover how relationships work. Who likes me? Who is attracted to me? Who do I find attractive? And many are struggling already during this time, not only with their peers, but also maybe with their home life.
Yeah.
In other words, in today's world, and I don't mean to be too critical, but I see this every day. In today's world, there's a lack of parenting. In today's world, there's a lack of leadership in the life of many adolescents. Mom has her thing, dad has his thing. Sometimes they're not even married, they're divorced. Dad wants to be Disneyland dad on the weekends. Mom has to be the tough parent and disciplinarian during the week. And so sometimes there's a lack of leadership in the lives of our adolescents. And so they grab, many of our adolescents, the latest cultural trend. What's the latest and greatest and most relevant, movement in their life? And so sometimes they'll do that. And for some, it's the transgender movement. Maybe my problem is I don't know who I am. Maybe I really am a male in a female's body, or vice versa. Some will listen to what I call the demonic lie, that somehow God made a mistake when they were made. Somehow God made a mistake, or even worse, they feel they know better than God. Or perhaps even worse than that, maybe God's not there at all, or God's not involved, or God's not interested in my life. And so what happens is many adolescents struggle in this time of their life with, who am I?
Yeah.
And Erik Erikson said this, 100 years ago, this identity versus identity confusion. Who am I? Where do I fit in? What's important to me? What do I believe? Why do I believe it? Are my parents right in their beliefs? Am I right in my beliefs? And so all this is going on in the life of a child, and there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of insecurity. There's a lot of phobias starting to develop. And so for a lot of kids, they're just in a really difficult place in their development.
Right. And it's not abnormal. This is a universal experience that all human beings experience.
Yeah.
And this is something that you talked about Erikson. Erikson has virtually no one goes against this theory that Erikson observed and put on paper.
Right.
And it, like you said, this has been taught in universities and grad schools and doctoral programs, because it's something that is true. It's observable. It's something that we know exists.
And so the reality is all these stages of development have merit And the thing is that Erickson, would argue is that how well you do in one stage of development determines how well you succeed in the next stage. So if you're really doing poorly in one stage of development, chances are you'll go into another stage of life with a very poor foundation because you didn't do very well in the previous stage of development. And that will begin to snowball, if you will, as to who you are as a person, your success or failure, how you see life, et cetera.
So with this being a common trend that's always existed for human beings, whether, the age range may shift a little bit over time, why are we seeing so much of this now with the transgender movement?
Well, I think because, again, so many of our adolescents do not have strong leaders in their life. They don't have those role models. They don't have, in some cases, and I hate to say this again, but they don't have the parents' involvement like was happening 15, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, where you had a stronger family unit. You had moms and dads involved in the lives of kids. Now, what I will say this is that this is not true of every single adolescent, some more than others, but we're seeing more, unfortunately, experiencing this because, again, they don't have the role models. They don't have the instruction. They don't have the leadership in their life. And so because of that, they will find their information on social media. They'll find their information, in various other venues as to what does a guy look like or a girl look like, or what's a guy to be like, or what's a girl to be like, et cetera. And so, again, with all of the social miscues that many are receiving, there's a lot of confusion and there is a lot of concern because of that. And so here's what is happening that, again, as we said before, many are not talking about or admitting. And that is, number one, transgenderism begins with an identity issue. So transgenderism is an identity issue. So again, if I'm not sure who I am, if I'm not sure of my identity, and I have, all this hurt and confusion and fear and paranoia and diffidence in my life about my relationships, then I'm going to have a lack of self-confidence.
Right.
I'm not going to know who I am. I'm going to begin to question what's, wrong with me. And for some, they begin to hate themselves and they begin to hate life, or they begin to become angry with themselves or angry with life, or life's too painful. And whenever you're in pain, you're trying to find some way of alleviating that pain.
Right. You got to have some sort of way to manage what you're experiencing.
And so for a lot of these adolescents, this is their go-to. They hear other people say, well, I'm trapped in a woman's body and I'm a guy, or vice versa. And they're going, maybe that is going to be the cure. Maybe that's what's wrong with me. Maybe that's the problem. So number one, it's an identity issue. Number two, I will argue it's a truth issue. Truth meaning this. Every species, and we heard this in Biology 101 in high school, right? Every species is broken down to male and female.
Yeah.
Okay. In many cases, in medicine, there are certain medical exams that only men will have. That's a truth. There are certain medical exams only women will have, and that's a medical truth.
Yeah.
There's not a medical doctor that will put his reputation on the line and say that I will give certain women men's exams and I'll give certain men women's exams.
Right.
They're not going to do that.
Not ethically, yeah.
No, not ethically. And so the point is, so this is a truth issue, both biologically as well as in medicine. Again, we know this much. There are 6,200 biological differences between men and women.
That's a lot.
6,200. As a matter of fact, as one person argued, you can, dig up, skeletal remains of someone who was maybe buried, 500 years ago, and there is absolutely nothing left but a skeleton. But because of the DNA and because of the skeletal structure, because of the bone, and because of the size of the person, and on it goes, you can tell with about 99.999% accuracy that this is male or female.
Right.
And so again, there's 6,200 biological differences between men and women. Again, many are very obvious, some more obvious than others. But here's the point. Surgery and hormonal, and hormones being given to a person does not change their sex. Surgery and hormone replacement, if you will, do not change a person's sex. Hormones and surgery only neuter or sterilize you. Hormones and surgery will only neuter or sterilize you. And this fact, by the way, is documented in the Superior Court of California, 1990.
Really?
Yes. And so these are some things that, again, people never really hear or understand, or they never really embrace. So again, hormones and surgery really do destroy who you are when it's done in this arena of life. Not only that, but the transgender movement is a psychological self-hate issue,
Right.
i.e. gender dysphoria.
Yeah.
As some try to identify with a parent with whom they feel a disconnect. We need to unpack that one.
Right.
What we're starting to see is this, is a lot of people who struggle with transgender issues, again, are trying to identify with a parent with whom they feel disconnect. Think of it like this. If a person says, I think my dad would love me more if I was a guy, and she's a girl. So what does she do? She begins to move in that direction. Or I think my mom would love me if I had been her daughter instead of her son. And so they move in that direction. And so sometimes this is done consciously, sometimes it's done subconsciously. But what's happening is there is this self-hate that has built up because I'm not getting the attention, I'm not getting the affection, I'm not getting the adoration from a parent. And all I'm hearing, here and there is, I wish he was a girl. I wish she was a little boy. We should have had a little boy. We should have had a little girl. We should have had all girls. We should have had all boys. I wish the last one would have been a boy or whatever. And what begins to happen is that begins to find its way into our conscience, our subconscious, into our ego, if you will. And we begin to realize, well, maybe if I was a girl, I would be loved more. Maybe if I was a boy, I'd be loved more. And so this self-hate now creates this gender dysphoria.
It sounds like that's almost a branch off of the Oedipus complex of the Electric complex. Freud talked about that a long time ago about this struggle between parents and their children. Sounds like it's a similar idea that there's a struggle that's happening between parent and child, and then the identity that it forms around that.
Well, Dr. Myron Madden said years ago, he said, every child looks for the blessing. Every adolescent, every young adult looks for the blessing from their parent. And most individuals, he said, will do almost anything to get the blessing. I've met people who have multiple degrees and have served on boards of multiple companies or started their own business or have their own practice. And they do all these amazing things with the hope that one day their mom or dad will tell them how proud they are or how grateful they are or how, special they are or whatever it may be of them. And they never get that blessing. And they keep striving to do more and gain more and have more so that hopefully their parents will notice that they have arrived or they have achieved or they have accomplished. And the point simply is this. For some people, the thought of, I will never be a girl if I'm a guy, but maybe I can transition. And if I do that, then I'll get my parents' blessing. And so we don't talk about that because, again, that's not something that people want to look into or people want to recognize. But we are starting to see that more and more and more, where a person wants to have the favor or the blessing of their parent by changing, if you will, quote unquote, transitioning their gender. Next, some will argue this is a spiritual issue, thus a theological issue of rebellion and defiance towards God is taking place here. The reason why we can say that is because the Bible says we've been fearfully and wonderfully made by God and for God.
Right.
And thus, to try to undo that means that you don't think God is correct, or once again, you believe you know better than God, or God's not to be trusted, which is the first lie in the Garden of Eden, if you will. One of the first lies you hear Satan say, and that is, can God be trusted? Did God really say that? Do you really believe that God meant what he said? And so again, this movement, basically says that God doesn't matter, God cannot be trusted. And going back to another scripture, therefore we get to do what is right in our own eyes.
Yeah.
And so when a culture, a society, an organization, whomever, begins to take on the philosophy that we all get to do what is right in our own eyes, things begin to break down. And that's what you're starting to see in many arenas, even today. So again, when we rebel against God, not only that, we redefine morality. When we rebel against God, we define what is good. We define what is evil. And so this is very important to note. One last thing about, in the area of the spiritual realm, that Jonathan Cahn said something a few weeks ago. He has a very unique perspective in this, a very unique spiritual perspective in this area. He says that we must consider, he said, what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 12, 43 through 45. And Jesus basically said these words, that when an unclean spirit goes out of a person, when it returns, it brings 7 other spirits more wicked than before.
Right.
And things therefore get worse. And so what Jonathan Cahn is arguing is this, that in the ancient days, there was the demonic entity called the enchantress, who was worshipped as one who turns men into women and women into men. And many believe that this spiritual deception is making its way back greater and stronger than before.
Interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. And so, again, Jonathan Cahn unpacks that more in his book, The Return of the Gods. But again, I found that to be very interesting, that this not only is a medical issue, a biological issue, a psychological issue, but very much a spiritual issue. So many are asking, so why is this so important? Why should we be concerned? Why should we be having this discussion? This family, according to this question, is having some dissonance, if you will, because the parents and the daughter are in disagreement. Why is this so important? Number one, because many in universities and schools and courts and churches are being forced to say what they don't want to say.
Right.
They're being forced to embrace an ideology that is not based on medical truth, biological truth, or scriptural truth. And so whenever someone, that's like saying, that's like a medical doctor having to say, well, I don't think cancer will kill you. Okay. Because I don't like what you're saying. I don't want to hear what you're saying. And so you cannot say that cancer will kill you. And if you say that, then we're going to cancel you. Well, if you tell that to a medical doctor, that's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
Okay. So my point is that we're in many parts of our culture, churches especially, are forced to embrace an ideology that's not based on medical truth, biological truth, or scriptural truth. And what's worse, they're forced to deny medical truth. They're forced to deny biological truth. They're forced to deny scriptural truth, or they will be canceled. Or in this case of this family, they will be insulted and told, terrible things and being, abused verbally, et cetera. So again, why is this so important? It's because sometimes a person's medical care in an emergency situation may be based upon how they identify. And if they're trying to get medical care as a woman and they're really a man, or vice versa, that could be a problem,
right,
for the medical community and for the patient themselves. This impacts sports. Again, we're seeing time and time again where a lot of men are now going over into women's sports, and they are breaking records, and they're winning, the race, and they're winning, the meet, and they're winning, the tournament. And you're going, well, how is this? And so it's beginning to turn women's sports upside down, which again is a great insult to the women who have worked hard and practiced and given time, tons of time and energy to be good at what they do.
Top of their sport as a female.
Right, as a female. And then here's this man who comes along who's biologically stronger, taller, in some cases faster. This also impacts privacy of restrooms. And again, I'm not sure if most people who are listening want their, 10-year-old little girl to be in the restroom with a 25-year-old man who thinks he's a woman.
Right.
Okay. And so these are problems that our culture is struggling with and dealing with. The bottom line is this: these things that we're talking about in this transgender movement is denying baseline realities. That's the bottom line. It's denying baseline realities. And for many, after their surgeries and after their hormone blockers, which are irreversible, many are still not content and they're still suicidal. I was listening to an interview just yesterday with this transgender adolescent named Jazz. I think Jazz is very popular on many of the reality shows, whatever. And Jazz is crying. Now, Jazz is a little boy who was hormonally and surgically, quote unquote, transitioned into a little girl. Okay. He is crying. And I'm using the word he. He is crying because he is not feeling like himself. Now he's had the surgeries, he's had the hormone injections, the puberty blockers, all of these things. And he's crying because he's not himself. The point is this: what has happened to him is irreversible.
Yeah.
And the reality is this: now there is no going back. And many people who are discovering this are now more suicidal now than they were before. At least before, maybe through therapy, maybe, you know, through other means of working with this person. But when you have puberty blockers and surgery, these things are not reversible.
Yeah.
And so now, bottom line, they are without medical help as far as going back to their original sex and gender. And so again, what's happening is this: a lot of these people are saying, I have lost my future hopes, dreams, my ability to ever parent again, my ability to ever be in a relationship that, again, I believe is correct and proper and of God again. And so the question is, these parents are asking, are they wrong? Are these parents wrong? I would argue no, they're not wrong.
Yeah.
Because what they're simply saying is there's a baseline reality here, medically, biologically, spiritually, scripturally, psychologically. They are not wrong. And these parents are standing on truths, again, from medicine, from biology, and from scripture. So I would argue here's what's needed. Here's what we need to share in our families, maybe in various other circles, maybe in our churches. Here's what's needed when it comes to this transgender issue. What does truth say? What does medical truth say? What does biological truth say? What does scriptural truth says? I mean, the Bible says God made them male and female. Jesus put it that way. God made them male and female. Next, we who stand for what we believe is true, medically, biologically, and scripturally, we should not be bullied or canceled or attacked or insulted or be intimidated by those things, nor should we do those things as well.
Right.
And I think there lies some of the great concern that we're seeing and hearing. Again, we can have differing views, but that's okay. In other words, and here's the bottom line once again, let the truth change us.
Yeah.
We are not called to change the truth. Let the truth change us. We're not called to change the truth. Speak truth with love. Share your views with love. Find our identity in Jesus. Let his spirit renew and transform our mind, which is powerful and important. As we refuse to be transformed by the culture, work through these things like anything else. This is an issue that's not going to go away, so we need to work through it with our family. But most importantly, be willing to learn and grow in our understanding of God and his word and what God has given us and what God has declared to us and how God has indeed fearfully and wonderfully made us.
Well, there you go. From the family answer man himself, what it looks like is in a family and with friends and with society in general to deal with the issue of transgender ideology, how we handle it. We stand on truth and we do it with grace as always as we walk in the footsteps of Jesus. We want to thank today the incredible people at Winter's Air and Days Smokehouse and Specialty Meats for underwriting today's show. As a reminder, this is not a therapy session and we can't give specific advice to your situations. So we do encourage you to seek professional counsel for those answers. But we do hope that the Family Answer Man has led you and inspired you to make changes that will lead to a stronger and healthier and a happier family. And if you would like to send us a question and have us answer those, you can email us at familyanswerman@liveoak.church. That's familyanswerman@liveoak.church.